This is how you find distance and midpoint by Lucy and Sienna.
This is how you solve using midpoint formula. First, take the first x point and add it to the second x point. Then take the first y point and add it to the second y point. You will now have two fractions. Divide the numerator by 2. The fourth step is you divide both fractions and you will have the midpoint. This is an example of the midpoint formula. Next clip shows how to solve using midpoint formula. First, we have to add points x1 and x2 together. Then divide that by 2. We have to do the same thing for the other side, so add y1 and y2 together. Divide that by 2. Then we get our new fractions, which is 9 halves, which equals 3, and 10 halves, which equals 5. Then we get our new points, which is 3, 5, and that's our midpoint. Does anyone have any questions about solving for midpoint?
In order to find the midpoint on a graph, you have to follow these steps. The first step is to determine where on a graph the points provided are. The second step is to draw a square or a rectangle which connects the 2 points. Then the third step is you try and find the middle of the shape, and that should be your middle point. Here is a delta math example of finding midpoint. And here's a video example of how to solve. The first step that you have to do is you have to determine where on the graph the 2 points provided are. So for point A, it's -9, -3, so you put a point there. And for point B, it's 1, -9, so you put another point there. Then you draw a square to connect it so it's easier to find your middle point. What you have to do to determine where the middle point is you have to kind of estimate where on the square would be the middle. So for my midpoint, I think that it'd be -4, -6 because that looked pretty much in the middle. And then I just connected it and then I put what points were where. Does anyone have any questions on how to find midpoint graphically?
This is how to find the distance between 2 points. The first step is to find the 2 legs of the triangle. The second step is to use the hypotenuse formula, a squared plus b squared plus c squared. Step 3 is to plug in a and b with the numbers you found. For example, 6 squared plus 8 squared equals c squared. Step 4 is to solve and add the numbers together. For example, 36 plus 64 equals c squared. Step 4 is to use the square root to find c. This is an example on how to plug in your numbers and find c squared. This is an example on how to find the legs of a triangle and how to draw a right triangle. This is how you find the distance between 2 points. First, you find the points of the triangle's legs, which are 6 and 8. Plug them into the formula. Then you have to square the numbers. 6 squared is 36. And 8 squared is 64. Now you have to find the square root of the sum, which in this case is 100. Now you get c squared, which equals 10. That's how you find the distance between the 2 points. Does anyone have any questions on how to find the distance between 2 points? How to find endpoint from midpoint and endpoint. Step 1. Plug your numbers into the algebraic method formula. Step 2. It depends on what points they give you, either A or B. In this case, they give us A, so the first formula would be the first x point plus the second x point from B. For example, the first x point for A would be -7, and the second x point for B would be x squared. Step 3. Do the same thing for the other formula. Step 4. Now multiply the midpoints by 2. Step 5. You will now have two two-step equations. Step 6. Solve the equations and you will get the coordinates for B. This is an example on how to find the endpoint from midpoint and endpoint. This is the formula to help you solve for the coordinates. M equals x1 plus x2 over 2 and y1 plus y2 over 2.
The next clip shows how to solve this. The first thing you want to do is you want to write down the algebraic method, and you also want to write down the given information that you already have. The next step is you have to plug the numbers into the formula. So plug in -7 as x1 and add x2 because that's the number you're trying to find. Then put that over 2. That would equal to 0 because that's the point for the midpoint. For the second formula, you plug in the y points, so -8 plus y2 over 2. That would be -5 because that's the second point for midpoint. Once you've plugged in all the numbers, you multiply 2 times your midpoint. Now you have to bring down what you have in the numerator.
Now multiply 2 times the midpoint. In our case, the midpoint is 0, so 2 times 0 is 0.
Then you do the same thing for the other problem. You bring down the numerator and you multiply by 2.
Now subtract -7 from each side. Do the same thing for the other equation.
Then your final answer is 7, -2. Does anyone have any questions about how to find endpoint from midpoint and endpoint? These are our questions for the class. The first question is find the midpoint with the following points, 4, 10, and 10, 6. The second question is find the midpoint for points A, -9, -3, and B, 1, -9. You have a minute to solve before we say the answers.
The answers are for the first question, 7, 8, and for the second question, -4, -6. Does anyone have any questions about this lesson?